I had to have something with a penguin on it at some point. So it's this is no. My penguins have nothing to do with Linux. Let's be very clear about that. It's entirely separated. So I'm, as you can see, I'm a chief evangelist at Callas, which means I do stuff with marketing and product management and whatever else is important to get the solutions out. But I'm also, and this is kind of the hat I'm wearing today as well, I'm also executive director of the Gantour Group. And in that role, I also think about standardization and making PDF files accessible for printers, but not in the meaning that accessible is used mostly here. And what I want to talk about is indeed these new design tools that Dietrich already mentioned, things like Adobe Express, things like Canva, where people say, oh, this is really cool to use. And then it comes to a printer and the printer kicks them out. And my question is that really, should that really be the case? Do we really have to look at it that way? And I may come up with a conclusion that printers or people in the pre-press industry may not like, but we'll see. So it's safer to do it here where I don't have too many people from pre-press than in other meetings. So this is Ghent. You're welcome to visit it. I'm only putting it on here to explain a little bit where I come from. I started my career at a small company founded in Ghent that is called Enfocus. People from Enfocus Marketing would kill me because this is by far no longer the official logo, but it was the one when I was there. I worked at Gradual, which made a tool called Switch, which is now also an Enfocus product. I worked at a distributor of software for 15 years. And then since about a year, I am with Callas directly. And as I said, part of my role is to make sure that the software is understood by people. And in order to do that, I also get to play with YouTube and penguins at the same time, which is always great. So, what are we talking about? And I took the liberty not to follow the PDF Association presentation, but the Gantour Group look and feel, which means it's a little bit more colorful in this case. So what are we talking about? We're talking about... I was told this was okay. So what I want to talk about is these files from Canva and Adobe Express and so on, and are they any good to print? And then the first question is, what is a good PDF file? Now, Dietrich has already talked about that a little bit, but I want to take it back from looking at standards and look at it from the point of view of people in our industry. And when I say our industry, it's the print industry. That's where I spend the majority of my time. So the question is this a good PDF file? Right? And I could ask each of you to answer me. I could even send you the PDF and then you can look at it with tools and answer me whether this is a good PDF file or not. It has penguins, so it's not bad. But so when is a PDF file good? And rather than looking at standards to begin with, this is the statement that was the truth, at least when we started working with PDF a very long time ago. It was very simple. When a PDF file functioned in Adobe Acrobat, it was considered to be a good PDF file. It could be that it violated the standard, but if Acrobat would open it, then your PDF tools would better also accept it. That has evolved a little bit over time, of course, but at least when PDF started to become popular in print, that was kind of what you had to live with. And if Acrobat couldn't open it, then it wasn't a good PDF file, even if it might have followed all of the relevant standards at the time. It's no longer what we said. And we can look at it from another point of view. So if I'm a printer, or if you're a printer, and you get a PDF file, when are you going to consider a file good? And then I can summarize that kind of in one statement and say, well, if it prints without errors and it prints quickly enough, both of which points were made by Dietrich in the previous session. So if there are no errors during print and it prints quickly enough and it doesn't hold up the rest of my workflow, then for a printer, that's a pretty good PDF file, right? But this is a very technical view, and we can make it a little bit better, perhaps. Now, before we do that, let's look at it from the other point of view. If I'm a designer, and this is what ChatGPT thinks a designer looks like, I'm not creative. If I'm a designer, what is a good PDF file for a designer? Well, if you're a professional designer, I think the answer is going to be close to, if my work gets printed and it looks the way I envisioned it to look, I wanted it to look, then the PDF file was good. So it's a bit of a different take on things than if I was a printer. If I'm a designer using Canva, maybe it's even easier, and I don't want to single out people who do things with Canva, but probably they're not professional designers that have had as much training as someone doing things with Illustrator and InDesign and Photoshop. I could make this even easier and say, well, if I create something and I make a PDF and I send it to a printer, and what I get back looks good enough for me, then the PDF file was good. That's hard to test for, at least for a printer. It's a little bit difficult. But that's the reality often. And that will come back in the conclusion at the very end of this presentation, because it influences, I believe, how you should look at things. So let's try to figure something out that we can all kind of live with, and what people in our industry would be able to do something with. And then I could say, well, if it prints without problems and there are no complaints afterwards, then it's a good PDF. And that kind of marries the 2 points of view. There are no print problems, so this goes through without an issue. And afterwards, my customer doesn't call me to say that they're not going to pay because I printed something that wasn't correct. If those 2 statements are correct, then I have a good PDF file. Right? If you don't agree, you can tell me. But that's what I'm going to use as a definition. Okay. So then let's look at it from the other side. And I'm not going to talk about ugly PDF files. There are enough of them. But we're just going to look at good and bad. So when is a PDF file bad? And the only point that I want to make here is that that kind of changed over the years. And that is something that not only happened within print, I'm sure, but also in other areas. When you look back to the very beginning and you would look at pre-flight profiles, so the set of rules that are used to check a PDF and make sure that it is good, it was very common to find rules in there that said your PDF contains the font Courier, and so it's a bad PDF file. Why? Because Courier was the default substitution font if a font was not embedded in the file. And so that was indicative of something not being probably totally correct. There was another rule that said was created with PDF Writer, and PDF Writer was a very, very, very bad piece of technology that converted things into PDF, and you were almost assured that if the file was created by PDF Writer, the quality was going to be really bad and you wouldn't want to print it. So that was a rule in very early pre-flight profiles. We even had something called a city font. Does anyone remember what a city font is? So those are fonts like Geneva and Chicago that were invented to show things on screen. And so they were very bad quality for print. They worked really nicely on screen, but they were very bad for print. Invented by Apple as a naming convention. They all followed names of cities. And I know that Geneva and Chicago existed. There were a number of others that I don't remember. So that has evolved a little bit. These 3 things are no longer in any standard for PDF or from ISO or from Ghent Workgroup or anything like that. And there are more of that. So what you see is that over the years, as PDF matured and as the technology matured, the definition of what a bad PDF file is changed significantly. Things like TrueType fonts were not allowed in some of the Gantois Group profiles, specifically the profiles for newspaper advertisements, because their technology could not reliably handle TrueType, and so you have to give an error for that. That's no longer the case. At one time, files were flagged where the fonts were completely embedded because there was technology, from Adobe in that case, that couldn't handle completely embedded fonts. The fonts had to be subsetted in order for them to work. So all of these things have changed a little bit. And so the question you could ask is, what do we do with these Canva and Adobe Express files if we at one point had a rule that said was created by PDF writer? Should we now have a rule that says this file was created by Canva, and as a result we're not going to print it, or we're going to isolate it from the print stream and someone needs to look at it? Now, that sounds very not woke in these days because it's discrimination based on origin, right? And we're not supposed to do that, not even for PDF documents. It's also not very realistic. The percentage of things that are made by Canva is growing significantly. I heard from certain people that their poster was made by Canva, and that looks like a pretty nice piece of print work at the end. So just saying that a file isn't good because it comes out of Canva is not a good idea. That's not what you want to do. So let's talk about design tools. There are two classes of design tools, and I'm only interested in the second one. The first one is what I would call professional tools. And when I grew up, that was PageMaker and FrameMaker. FrameMaker still exists, I'm told. Today, you would probably talk mostly about Quark Express. You talk about InDesign, Illustrator, Photoshop. And I at least would add Affinity, Publisher, and Designer to that. I think all of these tools are kind of on the same level. I am sure that some people might want to argue about calling Affinity Publisher really one of these professional design tools. I'm sure if you would ask Adobe, they might not agree that that is the case. But to me, they fall kind of in the same group of applications. Why? Because the definition for me for things that are casual tools are these things here. They are design tools that lack some functionality. Yeah? Or features that are necessary in professional print workflows. And that could be that they don't support the type of color space that is typically used in print. It could be that they don't support overprint or transparency. It could be that they don't allow you to add bleed or have no idea what that is. All of those kinds of things. But it is tools that lack in a professional print workflow. And Affinity, at least as far as I looked at it, doesn't really follow that definition and is more in the professional tools than in this group. So what I am talking about is things like, well, we all know it, all of the Office applications, whether it's Microsoft, Google, or Apple, things like Adobe Express and things like Canva. And there are probably others, but most of the others, or many of the others, are perhaps not yet used to create PDF files for print. One of the very, very popular applications in certain circles is Figma, for example, that is made to do user interface and design concepts and so on. But you're not hopefully going to use that to create a brochure or a technical poster. Then again, that was probably what we said 10 years ago about Canva as well, so that may evolve. So, are these tools really bad? And here is where it becomes interesting, and became interesting for me at least, is because when you talk to printers, conclusion I think that many printers have made is that these tools are really bad, should not be used, and the files that come out of it are all bad. And in the end, that is not really my conclusion at all. So let's look in a little bit more detail. Look at something like Microsoft Office. And I've looked at Microsoft Office and not the other ones, the Googles and Apples, because I think Microsoft Office is still more used. I have absolutely no data to validate that statement, but I think it's true. But they're all kinds of similar when it comes to what you can do with it. There are a range of things that are an issue with Microsoft Office generated PDF files. And the biggest one is probably color support. The Office applications in general do not support things like CMYK, they do not support spot color and so on. And that can be an issue. They also, in most cases, have a lack of support for things like bleed and page boxes. Can you define an accurate trim box? Can I define an accurate bleed box? Can I add things like trim marks around them in the right spot, and so on? Most of them don't offer that many options in how to export to PDF. I think Office these days allows you to say whether it's for print or for something else. And when you say export for print, you get something that is slightly better than the other choice, but it's certainly not the amount of options that you have from something like InDesign or Photoshop or Illustrator. And then font problems is a bit special. I think the one thing that everyone in print remembered things like Word for was that they were not very good or not capable at embedding fonts into a PDF document. I don't know what crackles. I have no idea. I can stand here as well. I'm not sure it's going to make a lot of difference. Yeah, well. Yeah, so, but, so I think in the past there were really font issues with a lot of these applications, and it was almost impossible to create something from Word that that had embedded fonts. That is no longer the case. It is actually today very difficult to generate PDF files without the fonts embedded, to the point that if you want to have test files to play with where the fonts are not properly embedded, that you have to do actual work to get that file. When you look at Adobe Express, the situation is slightly different. The problems are mostly concentrated around color support. So Adobe Express supports RGB. It's that simple. And everything else is somewhat not supported. And with that comes some other things. You can't use spot colors, and that can be important, and I'll come back to that. You cannot support overprint because RGB doesn't do overprint in our color model. So that can be an issue. We have to be aware of that. It is going to be RGB. It's not going to be CMYK content. Even if you import something into Adobe Express from the professional design tools, then you're still going to end up with RGB in the output document. You can support bleed. They've somewhat hidden it, but you can now support bleed, and you can also support crop marks and output the bleed that you put in a document. So if you create the document correctly, it is also going to be output correctly. And of course, there is no support for things like PDFX when you output, or the Gantour group, or any of these professional standards and specifications. Now, very closely while I change to the Canva slide, and you'll see that it's very, very similar. The only difference is that Canva also uses RGB, but if you have the payable version of Canva, and only then, there is something that they call brand colors or something like that, and it's CMYK equivalents. So you still design in RGB, but you can set up certain colors that on output use CMYK. So I could have a Callas red color. I make it pure red in my design, but when it's output, it is converted to the CMYK color that Callas has defined as Callas red. This is a very strange concept, and it took me quite a bit of playing with Canva to make sure that I understood what they were doing here. It is also not spot colors. It's only CMYK conversion, if you want, that happens on the fly. But that is the difference between Adobe Express and Canva at the moment. Now, notice that I say bleed is now supported, crop marks and bleed output are now supported. This was certainly not the case a year and a half, or 2 years ago. So these tools also change and get better over time. And so if you want to evaluate whether the PDF files are good that come out of them, then you also have to follow the evolution of these tools and make sure that you look at the most recent versions. Luckily, and that is a difference, there is no one using older versions of these tools because they're web-based, and so whenever something is updated, everyone who uses this stuff gets the latest version. So you can't have someone who is using a 10-year-old version of InDesign or Quark Express and then is surprised that their PDFs are not following the latest guidelines. So that is an advantage of both of these online tools. Somewhat also of the Office tools, but there are still real applications of those, so someone could still be using an older version. Okay, so let's try to come to some kind of a conclusion on this. And then here's at least my take on it. And feel free to give me yours if you don't agree. But I think there's a number of different points. The first one is that we should have the correct expectations. And this is something that I see not only in print, I think it's an expert problem, if you want. Sometimes I believe that also for printers, the expectations that they have of PDF documents are way greater than the expectation that the original creator has. If you have someone who uses Canva or InDesign, or not InDesign, Canva or Adobe Express, or Microsoft Word, or Excel, or PowerPoint, and they create a PDF file and they send that in to be printed, what are their expectations, and are they really going to care about the fact that the PDF doesn't contain spot colors or might have some colors that are printed slightly different than what we as professionals would think that we need in this PDF? I think sometimes the expectation of the printer is way higher than what the creator would already be happy with. The problem with that, of course, is you have to know what the expectation is. And so, yeah, if someone sends a PDF file to you, the printer will not always know. Also, because of what Dietrich said in the previous session, if you have to look at each individual file, you're losing money. It is that simple. Yeah, you want to process them automatically, and so you have to be able to process them automatically. And that means that you can't talk to whoever sent you the PDF and ask, how much do you know about graphic arts? And you sent me something in RGB. Are you fine if I'm converted to CMYK? You might not be able to do that, but there are software solutions to that, and we could easily elaborate on that if you want. The second thing is the point that I made before. You have to look at the progress that these tools make. And I don't even know if Canva existed 5 years ago, but these things evolve, and they evolve very, very quickly. And so saying that Canva is bad because 5 years ago all the files you got from Canva were bad is really not the correct way to look at that. You have to follow what these tools are doing and make decisions based on the current situation, not on what happened 5 years ago. And in the print industry, we're very good at doing things because of what was the case 20 years ago, so that you can't apply that trend on this. And so my point, I think, is that sometimes there is a difference between the PDF file not being perfect and the PDF file not being good enough for print. And that kind of contradicts what we often think of as quality control, or pre-flight as it's called in our print industry, where you will fail files for not being perfect, while probably a lot of these files can just be printed without anyone ever complaining about them. And not just because they don't want to take the time or they want to skip the complaining part because they don't have time for it or whatever, but because they honestly look at the business cards that come back and think that they are great, even though if you would be a professional designer, you might not agree, you might not like the color, and you might not like some other things. But not everyone has those same high standards. And then the last point is that I also think we should take our own responsibility, or rather, if you're a printer, you should take your own responsibility and make sure of two things. One, there are a lot of tools out there that can help you fix many of the issues that occur. Yeah? If you don't like RGB files, there are tools that can convert RGB into CMYK. Yeah, but that's not perfect. No, it's not going to be perfect, but it is going to solve a big part of your problem. And you can, with the tools today, be very specific about how you do these conversions. And you could make sure, for example, that black text remains nicely crisp, black-only text and isn't contaminated with other colors. So there is a lot of stuff that you can do to fix the PDF files coming in. And actually, many of these tools can do things that the original authoring application does not allow the user to do. If you're using Canva, you have no choice. You're not going to send in a PDF with a spot color because it's not supported. The tools can allow you to convert certain colors into spot colors, or they could insert a cut contour automatically based on the file and so on. So the tools are often more powerful than the original authoring application. And the second thing is, if you're going to be annoyed at designers because of the junk that they send you, then maybe you should try to communicate to those designers as well on what you want to receive. And the truth today is, if you go to websites from printers, on many websites, there is no information on what they want. And on some websites, they say, send us a PDF file. Thanks, that's very helpful. And on some other websites, they have really extensive and very good documentation on how to deliver files. And surprisingly, I'm willing to bet that those printers get many more good files than these other printers. So if we think that the tools like Canva and Adobe Express and Office are bad, then at least give some guidance to the people who are going to send you files. Are all of them going to read that, and is it going to solve the whole problem? Of course not. But there is a big difference between receiving 50% of the files that are not good and receiving 10% of the files that are not good. And so that is part of, I think, the responsibility of the printer to fix things. Because in the end, and that is the most simple and concise conclusion that you can make, you can be annoyed at people for using Canva, but guess what? they're not going to stop. So you're going to get the files anyway, and you'd better figure out a way to deal with them than to complain about it. And so my conclusion is that A, the files are not that bad if you really look at it. They can be easily fixed in many cases. And B, if you don't fix them, well, then what are you going to do? Send them back to the original creator? That doesn't work either. So you have to deal with them somehow. That's it. I don't know what my end time was, but...
Thank you, David.